This Restorative Justice Life is a production of Amplify RJ. Follow us on all social media platforms at Amplify RJ, sign up for our email list, and check out our website at amplifyrj.com to stay up to date on everything we have going on. Make sure you're subscribed to this feed on whatever platform you're listening on right now so you don't miss an episode. And finally, we'd love it if you left us a rating and review. It really helps us literally amplify this work. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to This Restorative Justice Life, the podcast that explores how the philosophy, practices, and values of restorative justice apply to our everyday lives. I'm your host, David Ryan Barcega Castro Harris, all 5 names for the ancestors, and I'm the founder of Amplify RJ. On this podcast, I talk with RJ practitioners, circle keepers, and others doing this work about how this way of being has impacted their lives.
Hey folks, I'm Elise, your producer. Our last guest of Black History Month is another one of the Black women who contributed to colorizing restorative justice. We are thrilled to close out this month with Belinda Dulin as our guest today. Belinda has worked in mediation, restorative justice, and restorative education at the Dispute Resolution Center. She has been a leader in many initiatives at the DRC and a changemaker in her community. This episode will highlight her experiences, a dialogue about cultural competence, and restorative justice in education. Before we get into this episode, please check out our History of Black Abolition Movements workshops and our Black Her Story reading list. Also, don't forget to get yourself a copy of Colorizing Restorative Justice. All of this information can be found in the show notes below. That's all for our announcements. Let's get into this conversation.
Welcome, Belinda. Who are you?
I am Belinda Michelle Dulin.
Who are you?
I am a daughter, a granddaughter, great-granddaughter, a niece.
Who are you?
I am a wife of 25 years.
Who are you?
I'm a mother of a 20-year-old African-American man.
Who are you?
I am a sister, the oldest sister of 5 children.
Who are you?
I'm an aunt and a great aunt of about 15 nieces and nephews.
And finally, who are you?
I am an executive director at an organization called the Dispute Resolution Center.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Belinda. We're going to talk about the intersections of all those relationships and all the things that you are in the world and more in our conversation. Also, just want to plug right up top, you're also a contributing author to Colorizing Restorative Justice, which we'll get to in a minute. But before we get to all that, it's always great to check in. So with the fullness of the question, how are you?
I am okay, David. In this moment, given what we've been living through for almost a full year now, I have learned to take that question on a day-by-day basis. So today is a good day. I feel good. I feel healthy. The people in my world are good and healthy, and I feel blessed.
Yeah.
With that all by itself.
Yeah, it is a unique time in our history, and like finding a balance between taking care of ourselves, taking care of our communities, is really important. How have you been able to strike that balance, if you have?
I take it day by day and hope that each day I am able to strike that balance. It has been very challenging. There's been a lot of loss of the norms of the day, of the work week. There's been a lot of loss in terms of how we execute our services at the Dispute Resolution Center. And there's been some loss within my family and community and just the people in my personal circle who have been victims of this virus, who have pulled through, but not without scare and then the loss of the other things in life, jobs, and the sense of safety, shelter. So it's a lot of ups and downs. So I've learned to take inventory of myself each day, making sure that I'm able to be the best me that I can. And when I can't, if I'm having one of those days when I can't, I allow that to happen too. So I'm moving away from that narrative that I'm a strong Black woman and I can push through anything. I know that I need to sit back and take care of myself and allow myself to heal when I feel wounded, when I get bad news, when I have a day with struggle. I give myself permission to sit back and heal a bit.
Yeah, what does that look like for you?
Well, I'm fortunate that I live in a home that has space, that I can have a space of my own. I can, have my secret closet, if you will, and and do that do that reflection. Have that reflective moment. What's going well? What can I improve? What can I contribute, if anything? um, just to give myself a little time and space. And sometimes that just looks like sitting at a table, sitting on the floor, lying on the floor in a meditative state. I do yoga.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Sometimes it looks like sitting in a bathtub of hot water and just allowing myself to go someplace else mentally for even 15, 20 minutes. That's helpful for me. No, just reaffirming that it will get better, um, because it does get better.
Yeah, your response has me reflecting on the words of Audre Lorde about self care being a act of survival, and like really revolution, when we're pushing against capitalist grind culture and norms of like we have to produce, we have to be of service to others. And so I'm glad you brought that up because with restorative justice, as much as we want to be healing communities, the first relationship that we have is a relationship with ourselves. So I'm glad you've been taking the time to do that. You've been doing restorative justice work for a while now. You mentioned the Dispute Resolution Center. You've been there for almost 20 years. But you've been doing restorative justice work probably before you knew the word restorative justice. So in your own words, how did that get started for you?
Yeah, so my journey in this work started as a
Mm-hmm.
mediator, and I am still a mediator. I have an academic background in dispute resolution, that I started that academic program, graduate school at Wayne State University in 1995. So it's been a long time. And I was mediating, and that was just fine. I discovered restorative justice um, in a formal way probably 13 years ago now, 13 to 14 years ago. But to your point, I realized we were doing that work even before I had the language. I think I grew up in a family unit, a system within the family with elders. I grew up with grandparents and great grandparents who played the role of that restorative facilitator, if you will. We just didn't know it. My great grandmother's kitchen table was the place where we ate, where we laughed, where we prepared meals. But it was also the place where she helped people problem solve,
Mm-hmm.
where she listened, where she advised, where she coached people through their conflicts, where she fed not only your physical self, but your mental and physical and spiritual self as well. So as a little girl, I watched this all my life. And while mediation was an important professional role that I took on, that's the capacity that I had to see it. When I discovered restorative justice work and peacemaking, I realized I had been living with that my whole life. And I think it was easy for me to connect with that work because it felt the most familiar to me. And I very often reflect on and reference my great grandmother, who was the peacemaker, and who did all the restorative work within our family. And I also realized that when she passed on, no one filled that void, and so things changed, which just confirmed the role that she played. So you're right, I didn't have the language for it, and I think many people of color don't have the language for it. But some aspect of our lives, we grew up in the spirit of this work, and it comes natural to us, and it's very comfortable.
Yeah. You mentioned that like it was you grew up in a household that had like multiple generations, and there's so much value in getting to grow up with that. Like that's not something that I got to experience, and um, I'm so glad that that was something that you were able to see day in and day out. Um, did that did seeing that role being performed by your grandmother inspire you to take a pathway towards mediation, or was it something else?
Well, not necessarily. When I started the journey on mediation, I was in my late 20s. Um, and what it meant to me was a career
Mm-hmm.
path at that time. That's what I grew up to understand. You finish high school, you go to college. I didn't hadn't quite figured it out after undergrad. In my job at the time, though, this was probably around 26, 27. I was being a quote unquote mediator with my
Mm-hmm.
coworkers. So I had a position with an organization that many people came to me just to problem solve, to understand maybe changing protocols, policies. And I very often heard about problems with coworkers, between staff and their supervisors. And informally, I was often giving advice or helping them think through what the real problem was, what is the issue, and how to gather information to address the issue for a resolution. I did not know it was called mediation. And one day, literally sitting at my desk, I came across a journal article, maybe in a publication around human resources or something, that talked about being a mediator. And after I read it, I thought, oh, that's what I've been doing. And I liked it, So when Wayne State was starting an academic program about dispute resolution, and that piqued my interest, and I enrolled. Went through the process of admissions, of course. Um, so that was fine, and I can only see that in a very commercial way, though. Be a mediator, work for a company, get a paycheck. It was when I stumbled up. So let me, before I jump there, in an academic setting, you learn about restorative justice, you learn about transformative justice, mediation. So you learn all of this different terminology, but I didn't spend time with it for application. I just, I learned it so I can take a test and, pass the class. But once I started to take a dive into restorative justice at the Dispute Resolution Center, it not only spoke to me, different place of time. By that time, I'm a mom of a toddler. I'm looking at information around discipline for Black and Brown
Mm-hmm.
children. In fact, at that moment when my son was getting out of elementary school, I started to get complaints from teachers that he was the class clown, that he couldn't be still, he wouldn't sit in his desk. They did not formally discipline him, but it was certainly a phone call to the parent to say something is wrong. And I started to take a close look at information around discipline in Black and Brown
Mm-hmm.
children. And I did not want my son to be labeled as a bad kid. I did not want him to get to be disciplined in school because he wouldn't sit in his chair. So I started advocating, as mothers do, and saying, well, did you know that the Wall Street Journal article said blah, blah, blah? Boys don't sit down as long as girls, but they still get their work done. So does it matter that he's standing or sitting? What I learned is that he wasn't running around the classroom. He just preferred to stand up. So that piqued my interest in the work because at that time in the state of Michigan, restorative practices was being used in schools or being discussed for use in schools. So I started to take a deeper dive there. And professionally, I started to have an interest in adopting that work as a part of the services that my organization could deliver. So it was twofold. I was having a personal experience with it as well as a professional epiphany about it. So I think the rest is a part of the history, just taking a closer look at how a Black child is regarded and how they are assessed in their behavior compared to white children. I mean, my son grew up in a predominantly white school district. And it was very obvious to me that when he did something, there's a call to mom. And I started to volunteer for the classroom so I can see what was going on. And what I would see is when a white boy would do the same thing, tell a joke, disrupt, kids start laughing, just doing silly things that little boys do, they would say, okay, that's enough. Let's sit down and let's focus on our work. I don't think parents were being called. So restorative justice became a very very, very personal issue for me. And fortunately, I work in an organization where I was able to move with it to do some things in the community as well.
Yeah. What were the things that you were reading, or who were the people that you were learning from at the time?
I was beginning to learn from find other practitioners in the state of Michigan and look at that. I began to have, and I can't think of the earlier writings that I was reading about, but it was just things that would pop up in my news feed around restorative justice and why aren't people using it. But a pivotal point for me actually was the ACLU of Michigan published the School to Prison Pipeline, which I think everyone in the country knows about. One of the authors for that came to me personally and said, we need to talk about this report, and we need to talk about what the Dispute Resolution Center can do to change things. And that just sort of bubbled up in me what I was experiencing as a parent with my son. Little, behaviors that are about being a kid were getting criminalized because in my mind, because these kids were Black and brown, that Black and brown kids are expected to perform and to be still and to behave in a way that their counterparts were not expected to do. And we were criminalizing that behavior. I started to revisit the concept of the zero tolerance policies in schools, in Michigan schools, and the impact of that when kids are not, so this is going to age me. When I was growing up, there was no zero tolerance. Zero tolerance came to Michigan schools probably 4 or 5 years after I graduated from high school. And I am very grateful for that because we were able to have conflict growing up and learn from it. We were able to understand empathy. We were able to have a natural cooling off period when in the heat of the moment of a fight. There were just some natural things happening as people get upset. As we learned that in an ecosystem of human beings, people are going to disagree with us, that we have to learn how to coexist with other people in their opinions. And that can be a hard lesson when you're very young. It can be a hard lesson for adults, given what we're going through in this country. But because I didn't grow up with a zero tolerance policy, school suspensions were not on the rise when I was coming about. So when I had a fight, and I had a few, I may have been sent home for the day to cool off,
Right.
come back tomorrow to problem solve. No one suspended me for 10 days. I don't even know if that was even part of the thinking process, because the impact of her not being here was more detrimental than the incident in and of itself. But in that process, I learned to be empathetic. I learned to say, okay, yeah, I did that. And this is the other people that were involved or got hurt by it. So there were some lessons learned in that. And with zero tolerance, we took that away. And what the school to prison pipeline shined a light on was this notion that by doing so, we are not preparing kids to live in society where there inherently is conflict.
Right.
We're going to deal with conflict. That's a part of life. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's a part of life. And restorative practices was mentioned in that report as a step to overcome what we were experiencing with kids. And my interest grew, and we were able to start putting together our own programming. So I want to go back to your first question of who did I read and what did I follow? I actually did a combination of things. I had been mediating for a long time. My career was evolving during the Columbine incident, so peer mediation was taking off. I had started dabbling in curriculum writing while in graduate school. So I knew how to pull the pieces together and infuse the values and philosophies of restorative justice practices, which talks about humanity, communication, consensus building, and decision making. I understood those concepts because I had studied them academically. So how do you pull all these pieces together? So I think in a lot of ways, we were innovative in that we had a little bit of a lot of different things that we fused together to create a curriculum and a program, if you will, that helped kids do just what I described: cool off, understand that conflict is normal and natural to our development as human beings, be empathetic, understand impact, and to own your behavior and problem solve.
Yeah, you mentioned in chapter 15 of Colorizing Restorative Justice, I think the title is Restorative Practices in Community, that like this piece around like interrupting, push out, or breaking the school to prison pipeline is like a major driver for you in this work. Oftentimes when this work is being brought into schools, it's being put on one person who is the Restorative Practices Coordinator or like an outside organization. And you're making the argument that this isn't necessarily the most effective thing. We need community support. I'm curious, like, what are the models that you've seen that didn't work and that led you to that conclusion? And what are the things that you have seen work?
Well, so let me add to my development professionally, and beyond that is really my development as a human being. About 7 or 8 years ago, the circuit court in the county where I work developed the Peacemaking Court. They developed a specialty court that was infused and aligned with the values and philosophies of peacemaking. And that changed the game for me completely. So the indigenous people from northern Michigan, the tribe Little River Band of Ottawa Indians, came to our area, and they sat with us for about 7 days total. And they shared with us what they do to address conflict. They talked about their history and harm, relationships, and community. And what I learn and what I speak about in the book is the absence of that approach as we take care of our children. Conflict resolution, especially for children, but I could say this for lots of different groups of people, is not just, learning a lesson because you made a bad choice. It's really an opportunity to not only teach, but to also nurture. And I believe that schools are a part of a community. Everybody knows how to get to their elementary school, right? Because they are intentionally positioned within communities. And if that is true, then it's the community's presence that helps to nurture that child or those children through the conflict. So not only do they learn the lesson of what they did or how to make it right, but they learn so many other lessons around humanity and support. When we push kids away through the suspension tactic, we really exclude them and we cut off that ability to learn. When we keep them in school and we surround them with people who truly care and who truly love them, who are invested in them and in their future, their community, we begin to nurture them just by keeping them included. We begin to see that they have an unmet need as well. What I know as a practitioner in dispute resolution, be it mediation, restorative work, or peacemaking, is that more often than not, if not, and maybe 100% of the time, people who initiate conflict have an unmet need themselves.
Hurt people.
Exactly. I was going to try to remember those words. In the social work arena, that's what you hear, hurt people. And that is true in dispute resolution. Academically, that is an interdisciplinary academic curriculum. We borrow from social work, human resources, political science, everything, to create this path of helping people resolve their disputes. And I did not see that happening in schools. I think schools, educators have to wear multiple hats. I know that, I understand that. But they are very insular in that they're not reaching out to the community or engaging the community or including the community in the work that they want to accomplish with kids, which is to educate them. I understand that. We want them to graduate. We want them to go to postgraduate, whatever, work, school, trades, whatever. But in that process, which is what the indigenous peoples believe, and being African American, I believe this too, that it does take a village to raise a child. And if that is true, and so many of us nod at that, we agree to that, then why won't we let the village inside the school? It puzzles me. And so in my chapter, when I talk about the community, that is a critical piece that is missing. And therefore, the programs that I've attempted to launch 12 years ago didn't last long because of that missing piece.
Yeah. How did that, what was can you share like some of the breakdown that happened because of the lack of community buy-in?
Yep. So I don't know that it was a lack of community buy-in. Right. I think it was a lack of community engagement. I would say that. There's a relationship, and and in this work, as you know, that relationships are so important. So we had a program, and I talk about this in the chapter. I won't identify the school, sure. But we had a program where the first year, I asked the school leadership, the district leadership, to give 3 years, dedicate 3 consecutive years to building this program, and you will get the shift that you want in climate. Very often, administrative people, in my experience, they wanted a magic wand. They wanted us to come in and fix these bad kids. I mean, they may not say that explicitly, but that's what was going on. Fix these kids, which is a crazy thought, and that is not the proposition for restorative work. So I would say, well, give us 3 years. Year one, we launched the program a few months into the school year, which means we're going to practice what we preach. We walk the talk. We're going to build relationships with the students, with the staff, with the administrators. I want my group to know where the classrooms are, go in the lunchroom, be a part of the community. That's important. We have to build trust. Students use the services. And I think we had well over 200 students to use the services that particular school year, which wasn't bad for a new program. We had community support. One of the best restaurants in our community, they have a bakery. They began to donate baked goods because we want to build community. So in our restorative room, students can come in with a problem, but we want to sit down and talk about it. And sometimes offering students a baked good, a brownie, a slice of cake, or whatever was helpful.
Right.
And getting them to open up and feel comfortable and all of that. It wasn't a bribe. It's just how we do our business.
Hospitality.
It's hospitality. We had community members, maybe a half dozen from the community, who volunteered their time. So we wanted to be hospitable to them as well. So that became a complaint. We were feeding kids sugary snacks. By the end of the first school year, we had addressed more than 200 young people, probably 8 different dispute types, and I have the data in my office. We had a high settlement rate, if you will, where people worked it out. We had a high compliance rate because we follow up with the young people and make sure things were still going. And that means we might see them in the hallway and thumbs up, how's it going? And they would say, it's cool. And the complaint was, in spite of all of that, people thought we were letting the kids into our room and letting them hang out and eat sugary snacks. Okay. Year 2, we went back and things were still going well. The students were excited to see us. The students embraced us, so they were comfortable with us. We had close to 400 kids to come through this room. And I think the student population was like 850 students in the building. So we're not talking about a 3,000 student building. So things were going well, same setup, and the complaints were the same. We didn't know what we were doing. And another complaint was we're letting them hang out in our room too long. So in other words, they're having a conflict where they're getting kicked out of class. Teacher is writing them up, and you only want them to spend 15 minutes with us. It may take us 15 minutes just to kind of de-escalate, right? Before we can get them to open up and talk about what's going on. And my advocacy would say, that side of me would say, well, let us spend time on the front end of problem solving so that, one, the young person can develop some skills and tactics of dealing with him or herself the next time it happens, because it will happen again. And they will have more time in school because they're not getting kicked out. And we're going to make up the time that they've spent in the office with us academically. So it's going to be a wash. And actually, we're going to see more engaging behavior from students. I wasn't able to sell that. So when year 3 came about, we were not invited to come back. So to me, that was a failed program. It felt like I felt like a failure. It took me years to get over that. Because we had the data spoke to the results of it. We built relationships with these students to the point that in the summer for breaks, they would call my office to check on us. That's how much they cared about us. So there was an intact relationship. We had other, a few members of the community and leaders of the community to buy into it. But within that insular system, they could not assess the value of it, and therefore we were not invited back. And I want to believe that it's hard to measure the outcomes of a restorative circle beyond your written agreement, because the depth of the work is so deep. I don't think systems and the way that they're designed now are able to assess that depth. It is not about how many agreements we get. It is about how we have helped nurture a student to help them decide that behavior change is worth it.
Yeah, one of the things that at Amplify RJ we frame our work around is like restorative justice practices are antidotes to white supremacy culture. And like hearing you talk about what you just shared and then like reading the book, like the things that stood out to me is like, okay, so worship of the written word, you have like all of these policies that need to be followed. Like they need this many instructional hours. Like if it's not done in like this one right way, being another characteristic of white supremacy, like that's not right. There's this idea of like, make sure that like the quantity of like these things just happen, like you turn them out, like I guess like emphasizing like the product being like resolutions or like agreements or things being settled over like the time that it takes a person to go through a process of one, de-escalation, but then also like healing and processing it out. I've often said that I don't believe that restorative justice belongs in schools institutionally. Like the structure of school as they are not conducive to that. So what do we do?
Oh, David, so you're reading my mind, because after that experience, and I had a couple other experiences in terms of talking to school leaders, and I reached that conclusion. Unfortunately, I did not know enough, or maybe I wasn't bold enough to even broach that in the beginning. I really thought if our State Department of Education is hinting at this, we have the School to Prison Pipeline report giving us this prescription of restorative practices. Everyone is talking about the education gap in this particular community. Everyone is talking about the educational disparity. Well, why wouldn't they embrace this work and roll with me? Why wouldn't you just do it? I certainly me and the organization I represent, we certainly come with the validity and the credentials. So that was not under dispute. And one day, well, probably one morning, my best thoughts at 3-4 o'clock in the morning, I'm lying in bed thinking, Belinda, what the hell are you doing? This is an institution that is designed to do exactly what it's doing. The school, the institution of our education system, and the institution of our criminal justice system are the same in a lot of respects. Lots of policies, very vertical, and very insular. Why do I expect them to embrace this little nonprofit, the work of this little nonprofit, and believe us? Therefore, we should take it out of the school. So it took me some years to kind of lick my own wounds, to be perfectly honest, and get beyond that, the hurt that I felt. I was truly hurt for myself. I was hurting for the students. I was hurting for the parents. I was hurting for the larger community. The particular school that I'm speaking of now is the lowest performing school in the county. It's the most impoverished community in the county. It has every disparity that you can think: education, health, income, on and on and on. And I thought maybe it was set up to be just that, a community that is always in despair. So what am I doing? Maybe it's time to take this out of the school. So efforts are in place currently to do just that. How do we create? COVID happened, so we're working through that. But we've been spending time looking into the larger community to say we need a place, a safe space. That is the restorative justice space where you come as you are, you come for healing, you sit in circle and allow circles to do what it needs to do. And that takes me to the peacemaking work. Restorative practices, the way we practice it in schools and other institutions, is to look at an incident and we look at the surface. So if we still only get maybe 2 inches below the iceberg, if you will,
Sure.
for problem solving, but we never get to the place, to the core where healing can happen. In the peacemaking work, the philosophies, the values that guide us in that work talks about healing, and healing through trusting and healthy relationships, healing through a community, right? In the state of Michigan, we have a number of indigenous tribes here, and I've been fortunate to visit about 3 of them, where I was able to sit with them and just observe and learn how, in spite of those disparities, as a community, they stay strong and they do the work collectively to work on their own healing, as well as the socioeconomic issues that they face. They're dealing with housing, health disparities, and all of that as well. And that's the space that we're looking to create in the community, that is accessible, that is there, that's free, and that is not living with all the rules and policies of a school system. After it took me a few years to get over my experience that I write about, and actually the writing helped me process and get over it. Actually, it was probably one of the most valuable exercises I've ever done in my life, because it allowed me to process that experience. It allowed me to understand why I was so angry. I was mad as hell, David. And then I didn't want to be labeled the angry Black woman.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want that stereotype. But at the end of that writing process, I proudly say I'm an angry Black woman, because I have a lot of shit to be angry about. My people, my children, now I'm going to get upset, I'm going to get teary, have been harmed for hundreds of years by systems that we had no hand in creating. We don't sit at those policy tables, right? And we've been harmed the most. And no one is thinking about our healing. So we might pay the consequence for the incident that we did or the crime that we committed, but we still need to heal. And I'm hoping that over the next few years, I'm jumping around a little bit. At the end of that writing process, I realized that I had a lot of stuff to be angry about. And it's the anger that fuels me at this stage of my life to say that before I'm done, the seeds will be planted, the foundation will be built to have a place that is restorative for all people, but in particular Black and brown people, that they can get to and really process what they experience in life. That's important to me, and that's the journey that I'm on now. And and I think it's because I had a chance to write this chapter and to be in community with other people of color, professionally and personally, that I've never experienced before. In the state of Michigan, there are not a lot of practitioners that look like me. And the few that there are, we're really spreaded, and we had no mechanism of coming together. So it's a very lonely work. And then this book project came about, and it put me in contact with 25, 30 other people who were having a similar experience. And so I felt brave all of a sudden. I got my courage back, and I'm back at it. And that's my end game, is to have something restorative that is community planted, not institutionally programmed.
Yeah. What do you say to people who are inside those institutions who want to embody this work?
I say just what you said. I continue to do the work with courts. I don't do a lot of school stuff anymore. I consult maybe as an organization, we consult, a couple schools are still trying to do it, but I am honest with them about that. So when a principal calls my office, and this has been going on for a few years too, when they call and say, hey, we want a restorative practice program, can you come over and teach our kids and do this or that? I say, yeah, we have to have a meeting with you and your administration. And we need to talk about power and privilege. Mm-hmm. We need to talk about why discipline is important and how you use it. What are these referrals about? Can I see a stack of them? Who is in conflict in your school? Is it the students having normal, natural conflicts? Or is it your staff getting into power dynamics with students? What's happening? Let's talk about what's really going on in your building. And that's a hard conversation. If you can imagine, an African-American middle-aged woman is speaking with maybe a white man with a PhD and asking him to assess and reflect on his sense of power and privilege. Mm-hmm. If we're going to do restorative practices right, and I will only do it if we're going to do it right, we have to talk about equity and how to flatten the hierarchy. So if you're sitting in the big office, in the corner office, and your job is to hand out discipline, and that's what your paycheck is built on, the dean of students, and my job is to discipline kids, then we need to talk about that, because that doesn't fit a restorative environment. Do you need a dean of students disciplining kids? If you want to talk about why it's important to you to have resource officers, quote unquote resource officers who are just really the police from the contract from your local police department or sheriff's department, and why that's important, not only to have in the front door of your school. Like, how inviting is that to a parent? I walk in your building and the popo sitting there, Mm-hmm. How does that feel? Why is that important? What are you afraid of? If you want to talk about restorative justice practices, let's talk about the dynamic of this hierarchy with your building staff, your teachers, the bus drivers, those who are in the lunchroom, and how that impacts your students. And if we want to start leveling the playing field, let's get some kids at this table to talk to about what their lived experience is in their building. So, as you might imagine, David, most schools say, thank you. I'll get back with you. And I don't care. And I used to care. That used to be a marker of success. Oh, we got into a school. We were in 3 schools because being colonized taught me to look at numbers and markers, right? That's how we check our success. I got in 3 schools this year. We set a strategic goal to get into 2 more next year. Those kinds of things. What I've learned to do is say they're not calling back because they're not ready for this work yet.
Right.
Restorative justice work begins with the individual. It's not what I do to you. It's what I am doing for me.
Right. It's about the internal work that has the external impact. And so for educators or for people who are working inside of colonized systems, like, embodying this work is to break those systems in the ways that you can. There's always this tension for me of, I, like you, sit on the outside of these organizations, and we can talk about how we, in our own businesses and our own practices, replicate systems of white supremacy and harm, because I know for myself that does happen, and we're working on eliminating that. But at the same time, we're also outsiders to these systems that are offering something that and we offer something that is totally antithetical to the goals of an institution like a school, right? and there are people who we care about, our people inside of those schools. And so like, how do we continue to take care of them from the outside? Is it just like you're saying, like building those alternatives outside, building the spaces for them to learn outside?
I think my hope is building those spaces outside of the traditional school setting will be helpful to not only the students, but also their parents and caregivers. What we've learned in this experience over whatever years it's been, I guess it's been close to, I didn't do the math, I guess 10 years or so. What we've learned is that members of the community, they want to see the work. They want to believe in it. They want to experience it in a more authentic way. So parents do not want their kids to be set up for a restorative program that says you can only do it 3 times. You can go to a circle 3 times, and after 3 times, we're going to kick you out. Mm-hmm. That is not a restorative environment. So we have learned that community members want it. And I believe that is part of my responsibility as a practitioner to start paving a way for them to be able to access it. So in alternative spaces outside of schools, I think will work. I think alternative spaces outside of the court system will be helpful. When I think about the number of students, and I think you said this when we met, there's an intersection. We know that when kids get suspended or go to juvenile detention, it's very likely they will enter into the criminal justice system as an adult. Mm-hmm. We also are beginning to look at data around kids who age out of the foster care system, right, and their entrance into the criminal justice system. So we have to think about that population too. Like if they're under court supervision and the disproportionalities where I work are the same, and they're under court supervision, they need a restorative space. We know the survivors of crime, the survivors of these incidents, they need that space too for healing. They may be able to do it together, these 2 groups of people, or they may be able to do it separately. But I believe as practitioners, particularly those of color, we are impacted by what happens in our community, regardless of what our zip codes are. I think it's up to us to create those spaces in the community so that people can access it and really benefit from what this work is about. It is the most powerful work that I've seen in my career journey. The peacemaking and the restorative work. People get to a place of healing, which is different from getting an agreement written down that I'll change my behavior by doing this, and you change it. Those transactions are fine. I'm not marginalizing that. I think that's fine, but it's just one step. We know if you are a Black or brown person in the United States of America, we have to have a place to heal as well from the things that are done to us, that have been done to us, and also from those things that we've done to others. We have to heal too.
When you wrote this, who did you imagine as the audience receiving it, and what did you want them to take away?
I think I speak to, I want other practitioners to read it, particularly my white colleagues, to understand that their lack of cultural competence is a barrier to the systems or the programs that they attempt to create in schools that are predominantly Black and brown. I want to be fair in saying that, maybe this approach works in all white schools, which I just don't know about because I've never been there. I wasn't educated there. I couldn't afford to live in that zip code, if you will. But in places where you have Black and brown children, cultural competence is important. The family unit is important. For instance, we talk about kinship. My white colleagues and I talk about kinship. And I had a conversation years ago that said, where they said, well, we need a policy around bereavement. Somebody in your family passes away, you need a few days off for that. I said, yeah, and who do you have in mind? Well, your spouse, your children, your grandchildren, parents-in-law. Well, actually, they did not say parent-in-law. They said your siblings. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, for me, that would be my parents-in-law. That can be my uncles and aunt-in-law. I mean, the concept of family is just different for Black people.
Sure, yeah.
And I said, actually, if Miss Mary, who lived at the end of the block and who had a hand in raising me, when she passed away, I took a day off to go to her services. Mm-hmm. Not because she's my blood relative, but because she was such a part of my community and a part of my life that she was like a relative. And so I think the dominant culture really draws lines in places that Black and brown people don't. We have a lot of blurred lines and dotted lines in our family structure. And I think that's okay.
Right.
But how do we honor that? So that's just one example of, I think, where the competence around culture is needed.
Yeah.
And so
I was going to say, some folks that I work with and I'm learning from, say cultural affirmation. It's not just that, it's like you're affirming that, oh, of course,
exactly.
That is your family. Of course, you're
exactly.
going to go take care of that, take care of yourself.
And so the audience that I'm hoping will read this, so one, I'm just grateful anyone will read it. So I thank you for reading it as well. I never considered myself a writer like this. But I want practitioners to understand two things: that being culturally competent, and now I'm going to add affirming. I think that's great. A great way to explain it is important. And I also want people of all races and ethnicities to accept that we do not have the right to appropriate this gift, change it, abbreviate it, shortcut it, give it a new name, and then expect to get the same result. That's my argument in the chapter. It is something unsavory about it. It feels criminal that we've taken something from Indigenous people who have said historically, this works in our community. Here, you can have it as a gift. And it has been manipulated in such ways that it's grown to appear ineffective. Yeah. In my experience with the school, they said it didn't work. It didn't work the way they wanted it to work. 15-minute circles, don't have refreshments. You get to go to circle 3 times and then you're done. You don't have the ability to go anymore. You can't, they did not want us to have the circles with all the students that might be involved in the conflict, just 1 or 2. Right. So there were just so many modifications, if you will, that they were constantly asking us to make. And when I started saying no, then we weren't invited back. And then we were told it didn't work. The report out was that, restorative practices didn't work. And then one person said, it wasn't in writing, it was just, something that I heard, it doesn't work for Black children, which was a very hurtful statement to me. Well, it's not working, not because the children are not able to engage, it's because your system won't allow it to work in its authentic self. Let the circles do what the circles are designed to do. And who are we to take someone else's craft, change it up, and then judge it that is ineffective. It just burns me up to even think that. And that's the arrogance of colonizers.
Yeah.
That's what they do.
Yeah. And I think like it's important, like you said, like to remember that it's not just white people who can uphold colonial systems, like folks of color, like uphold white supremacy culture as well, and this appropriation of other cultures. And like it's on all of us to make sure that if we're doing this work, we're doing it in the way that it was given to us. And if you don't know the way that it was given to us, like go learn that instead of like trying to like,
Exactly.
oh, like I learned this thing, now I'm gonna go train my staff, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So that was another thing. I personally sat in the learning space, and I'm still there. Don't get me wrong. I'm learning all the time. I will never regard myself as an expert of this work. Now, as a mediator, I'm pretty good at it. I might want to be the expert in that. But the restorative and peacemaking work, I got a long way to go because of this. I resent the notion that I can download a couple books and go to the Googler and Google a couple articles, and now I'm an expert. I'm going to train my staff and this, that. That is an insult. I'm going to contrast this with the conversation I had with a person in law enforcement. I said, in what profession can you go and do 25% of the training and say you have the whole job understood?
And then go teach
Can
it.
I go? Yeah, and go teach it. I said, could I go to the police academy, 25% of the academy, and then get issued a gun? No. And get deputized? No. So why do you think you can do 25% of the work that I've done and then you become the expert and you want to go teach it and design programs and implement it? And in that context, this law enforcement officer said, I never thought of it that way. I said, that's what colonization teaches us, right? That you can come to the indigenous work, pick up just a few articles about it, and now you're the expert. It's no big deal. Just run, and you want to run with it. It's insulting. Stop doing that.
Right. It's like, I think a metaphor that
Because policing wasn't invented by people of color, right?
Right. I was say like the other metaphor that I use is like you wouldn't take like a like one rock climbing class and then go try to climb Mount Everest, right? This is like constant practice that like you're gonna learn like some basics here, but like what are the things that you're gonna do to constantly keep working out, getting better, keep training? It's not just like a box to check off. There's so much more to do. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just going to add that it took me years in sitting with this work, understanding, being clearly a student of it before I felt I was ready to approach any person to launch a program. And I'm glad that I did that. Where did it come from? And a big question that I ask people in training is, who am I in conflict?
Mm-hmm.
How do I contribute to conflict? Do I avoid? Do I compete? Who am I in the restorative world? What do I think about people and humanity? What do you see when you see a child of color? When you see that child in kindergarten? This is something I say to educators. When you see that kid in kindergarten, what do you see? And then that child grows up in 7th grade. What do you see? Those are questions that we have to grapple with to really embrace humanity, to get prepared to even be a student of this work, in my opinion. If I am still, clutching my purse when a Black man is walking down the street, I'm not ready because I can't see his humanity. If I look at a Black boy in a classroom, and this is a personal experience with my son, he grew in middle school. He was really big. He was a large baby. He was in the 90th percentile for height and weight at birth. And he continued to grow. And when he got to be about 14, 15, teachers saw him differently. He had a little facial hair. He just grew. He just grew faster than many of his peers. He was the same child. There was nothing different about him as a human being. So those are the kinds of things that I encourage people to sit with as they begin to embark upon this journey. I think we do this work to think that we're going to do it to other people when we really need to start by doing it to ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting to the questions that I ask everyone. They're meant to be fast, but like they're often not. What's been like an oh shit moment that you've experienced doing this work, and what did you learn from it?
My oh shit moment was that it's not okay to be so neutral, the neutral third party,
Yeah.
which is what I was taught as a mediator, that it's not okay if it creates a person, it makes me feel like a person who is stoic and unable to embrace a person's humanity. So, oh shit, this mother is so upset and crying. Is it okay that I offer her some comfort?
Mm-hmm.
The neutral third party would say you just sit there and look. The human in me says you reach out and embrace. And that was an oh shit moment for me that the restorative work taught me that to be okay with.
Yeah. How do you define restorative justice?
We define it, and this is in my work too, we define it by saying that everyone in our community has value.
Mm-hmm.
So the restorative part is recognizing each person's value, even when they're not able to be their best self, and to support them through a process to create balance in their relationship or in a relationship that they've broken, and to also be accountable and take ownership of repairing those relationships.
Yeah.
But first, we have to see that every person has value.
Yeah, for sure. What's one place or situation you wish people really knew this work? There are many, but what's one?
There are many, there are many, there are many. I do a little bit of work, casework, where I am the facilitator with child protection cases. Children who have been removed and placed into foster care. I'm seeing the work on the front end where the kids are removed, but I'm also seeing it on the back end for kids who are aging out. And in that system, this work needs to be embraced and illuminated, because these children and these families become cases. They just become cases where caseworkers are processing, and we forget about that humanity. We backburner that there's a case that is the child going to be in the foster home, residential, or whatever. And I think this work will add value to that system if everyone in that system, everyone, it's a huge system, can get there.
You get to sit in circle with 4 people, living or dead. Who are they, and what do you talk about?
Yeah. So my father-in-law would be one of them, who has passed away. He was the principal of an alternative school that had an alternative school where kids were kicked out of their comprehensive school, but he never had a resource officer. He greeted every student at the front door and called them by name and shook their hand or gave them a hug or whatever. And he made breakfast for those kids every morning. So he would get to school at 5:30 in the morning so he can get breakfast going. He did restorative work. He just didn't use the words, but that's what he did his entire career. And he was also an activist. I would also want to sit with a couple tribal judges who I only met briefly. And I first saw them in a film around tribal courts where people who had committed harm were embraced by their court in the community where the repair of harm started. Mm-hmm. They addressed the incident, the harm, they talked about repair, and they dealt with the whole person. So what is your unmet need that this court can help you address so that you can be a part of our community and be a productive member of our community, again, our tribal community. And those judges also went to the community events, so they weren't separate from the community. They accepted gifts, they sat in circle, they problem solved together with the individuals who were considered harmful to the community. So there are two judges that I was able to meet, not only in the video, I met them in person, and one of them has recently passed away from COVID. So she was just 42 years old. And the fourth person, I would love to sit in circle with the editor of the book, Colorizing Restorative Justice. I don't know if you've met him, but he's a wonderful person, kind, and I've learned so much from him in the few years that I've known him around the history of Native Americans. I would like to learn more from him. The land, their relationship with the land. He's just a great teacher, and he would certainly be in my circle, and I think he and my father-in-law will have a good old time.
Shout out to Dr. Valandra. We need to get him on here.
Yeah, Dr. Valandra, who's also an educator as well, and I think he and my father-in-law would have just had an amazing dialogue, an amazing time. So being in a circle with those four people and learning from them, I think would be not only I would learn, but I would also heal, and I will be energized. I mean, just being with them separately certainly fuels me, and it makes me feel brave to get back out there.
Yeah, that sounds like an amazing circle. What is a mantra or an affirmation that you want to share with everyone listening to this podcast?
So these are words that I recently read. I think it's the book Race and Restorative Justice. Archbishop Desmond Tutu has a quote in there that a person is a person through other persons. And I've been leaning on that quote a lot as we've been living in isolation from each other for COVID, and we're doing work virtually, but reminding people that human connection is critical to our survival in this pandemic. But generally speaking, we're communal people, and we rely on other people to be our best self. So we can't lose track of that. I know the vaccine and the socioeconomic impact, all of these things, our political landscape has been so confusing and disheartening and frustrating. But as people, a person is a person through other persons. We make each other better. And we have the power to do that. So I've been leaning on that quote throughout the pandemic, just to remember that that's the most important thing for me.
Yeah. Ubuntu, right? All like we're all connected. We're all relatives. Who is one person that I should have on this podcast? And before you answer, you have to help me get them on.
Okay. It doesn't look like Dr. Valandra has been here.
Not yet. We've put out the calls. It hasn't quite responded yet, but
okay.
I've got Gilbert, one of your co-authors. Mm-hmm. He's put out the line for me. If you want to put that out there for me as well, would love that.
And I'm also thinking about, has Leon been here? Leon, I can't think of his last name right now, but he's one of the authors too. He's in London, and then I'm also thinking about Alexis Goff. Do you know him? He used to work with Living Justice Press, and the reason that they come out, Leon and Alexis stick out to me because when we think about the diaspora, mm-hmm. I think they'll bring a rich history and conversation. They're both Jamaican descent. So how they came through England, being colonized, coming through England, and how that their experiences are. it's just been eye-opening for me. I always often think of, African-American people. We're here in the United States and we went through all of this, and I didn't realize that the island people had unique experiences as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I will be looking forward to those connecting emails.
Okay.
Finally, how and where can people support your work in the ways that you want to be supported?
Well, I work for the Dispute Resolution Center.org is our website. We're embarking on some courageous systems change with our criminal justice system in Washtenaw County, Michigan. And there's space to support that in any way you want. It could be contributing training, presentations, finances, but we're literally the community. So this is not, prosecutors and judges making decisions. The community is pushing an agenda that is restorative. And the election results gave us a new prosecutor who is listening to that community. So we need the support to keep this shift going and to make sure that our community is strong enough to be that supportive community to those that we will no longer lock up.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're literally moving in that direction. We will not put people in jail, in prison just because.
Absolutely. And we'll link that in the show notes. Also, you can go to livingjusticepress.org and buy another copy if you haven't already of Colorizing Restorative Justice. Thank you so much, Belinda, for being here with us. Is there anything else that you want to share with the folks before we sign off?
Just a thanks to you and to Living Justice Press for this amazing project. I had no idea that I would ever be on a podcast or have any platform to discuss what I contributed. But I do want to thank them for that vision, and thank you and so many others in the trenches who are highlighting this work, shining a light on and giving us a space for our voices. People, Black lives, we matter. Our voices matter, and the real change in this work will be championed by those of color.
We'll end on those words. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. We'll talk to everybody else next week. Take care. David here again. Before we get to Elise for the wrap-up, I wanted to jump back on and give a little behind the scenes. Sometimes the best parts of our conversations happen after we stop recording. Part of me thinks about how those moments happen exactly the way they were meant to, but I really wanted to let you in on something that Belinda shared with me because I think it's a perfect callback on how she got her start in restorative justice. As we talked about the way she's continued to grow in the work, she's found herself playing the matriarchal role in her family, stepping into the shoes of her great-grandmother, inviting folks to the kitchen table, physically feeding people the family sweet potato pie recipe, and spiritually and emotionally feeding them by holding space for tough conversations. As we said over and over in this conversation, restorative justice isn't just about our community work, it starts at home with you. How are you embodying this work in your home?
Elise here. Belinda Dulin had so many great ideas to offer this episode, especially around the idea of community. One thing that really stuck out to me was her discussion and her commentary about institutions embracing restorative practices. Oftentimes, the communities that need these practices the most are the ones most resistant to embracing them. How can you and your community better incorporate restorative practices? Or how can you start them in your community? Also, Belinda brought up the point that experts in the restorative world, such as Black, Indigenous people of color, are often overlooked and their expertise is not often legitimized. These communities that are harmed in our society are also the ones that are not listened to in policymaking. How can we work to amplify Black, Indigenous voices beyond Black History Month? Thank you so much for listening today, and just a reminder, please check out our History of Black Abolition Movements workshops, our Black Her Story reading list, and get yourself a copy of Colorizing Restorative Justice. As always, all the information you need to know is linked below in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.
Like what you heard? Please subscribe, rate, review, and share this podcast on whatever platform you're using right now. It really helps us further amplify this work. You can also support us by following us on our social platforms, signing up for our email list, rocking our new merch, joining our Patreon, or signing up for a workshop. So many options! Links to everything in the show notes and on our website, amplifyrj.com. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.